Welcome to Reinventions in Between, your go-to podcast for real stories of reinvention that happen between life stages, career changes, and living abroad. I'm Sara Kojola, a life coach, interculture trainer, and reinvention facilitator, helping people on their quest to what's next. I have reinvented myself a few times, and in the past 20 years, I've collected fascinating stories of change. In each episode, my guests will talk about the why and how they took the leap and seized the opportunity to change their life. You'll hear accents, countries, vulnerability, and hooray! Let's begin. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah. You know me if you listen to Between Cultures, Reinvention in Between podcast. I'm very pleased to have a special guest with me today, Larissa Zhou, and she's plugging in from Pakistan, and I'm sitting in Melbourne, Australia. We met through a conversation of like-minded people living abroad through a not-for-profit called Families in Global Transition. We both attended some of those gatherings online, and I was fascinated to hear Larissa's story, and so I promptly invited her to share it with the audience or the listener and talk about her reinvention. So Larissa is a food scientist, but also a career coach. And it sounds already amazing because it talks a lot about how many talents, potential, and interests people can have, everyone can have in their own life. And that's just not limit the possibilities. So I'm curious to dive in and ask, first, welcome, Larissa.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. And yes, excited to hear all the little gems that are so inspiring for everyone who is listening. So I was saying, let's jump straight into the first question, which for me is very simple. How you had this transition, what happened and how you had to reinvent from food scientists, or are these two professions still being active or coexist in your life?
Yeah, so I'll try to make the set of events. I'll try to describe it in a short way and then talk about all the internal turmoil and the revelations that accompanied these external changes. So I've been a food scientist, I would say my entire life. I studied physics in college, at university, and very quickly realized I didn't want to do what I perceived to be quote unquote pure physics. And I was always interested in food. So I looked for a way to combine the two. And I realized there was this thing called food science. So I started coming out of university. I looked for jobs in that field, got myself set up, and kept working on that. So at first I worked at a company where we wrote cookbooks on the science of cooking, where I was the food scientist and worked with chefs to develop recipes, do lots of experiments to understand why different ways of making a dish would create different results and explain that to our readers. And after about 5 years, we wrote this big, huge encyclopedia on the art and science of bread making. And I wanted to move on and work on something else. And I was really interested in space travel and food. I had always wanted to be an astronaut when I was little. I realized that space food and camping food and food for the military is all the same sort of food, which is freeze-dried meals. And I thought this sort of food must be able to taste better. Maybe we ought to be able to cook in space, but the technology for that doesn't exist. I really wanted to work on that, but there are no companies that are working on it. It's a very difficult sort of annoying physical and mechanical problem to solve. How do you cook when you don't have gravity? And I decided to do a PhD, so go to graduate school, which is fundamentally about research. I was looking for some sort of container where I could do this research, just get myself set up in a lab and do it. And it seemed like the only way to do it was really to do a PhD. So I went and did that for 5 years and developed a prototype for cooking in space. It's basically a pot that has a unique shape that allows you to keep water and liquids in general where you want it to be. And I cooked pasta. That was my model food item, and got to test it on a few parabolic flights, which are the planes that go up and down, sort of like a roller coaster. So after my PhD, I took a year off to just rest. And so that was a sabbatical. I wanted to rest. I wanted to catch up on rock climbing, which is one of my loves. And I was living in Boston for graduate school. There's not that much rock in that area of the United States. And I also, at the same time, me and my husband, my spouse, we wanted to maybe start a family. So during that year, I did a lot of climbing. I got pregnant. And at the same time, my spouse, who works in international development, was coming up to rotate to his next posting. And I am Chinese American. I lived for a long time in the US. I was born in China. And my spouse is not from the US. He's from Italy. And he had never thought about living long term in the US. And I hadn't really thought about it until I got to a certain age of 35, 36. And I was like, this idea of not living in the US forever, like, why not? And so when his possibility to accept a posting internationally came around, I thought I was ready. So that came up at right around this time when I was taking the sabbatical. And then of all the choices, Islamabad, Pakistan was one of them. And we had heard really surprisingly great things about Islamabad, how it's very close to the mountains. You can go trail running, you can go rock climbing just right outside of town. And that's how I said, yeah, let's do that. I was up for a change, and maybe we'll get into it. I didn't really realize when I agreed to it that I was essentially like blowing up my life. I chose it. I didn't realize how much I would have to let go. How hard it would be at the same time as how exciting it would be. But anyway, it was those series of events that precipitated this move to Pakistan. And then all that, a lot of things that had to change were, I realized it was easy to say, yeah, let's choose Pakistan. It was as we were getting closer to actually moving, and I thought, what jobs could I actually do in Pakistan? Then I realized I had inadvertently decided to leave behind my entire professional network back in the United States. I also was interested in changing careers. That was partly why I said it was okay to go to Pakistan, because when I was working on space food, it was exciting, but I also realized how niche and elite it was, how narrow the band of people that I could impact, even though I believe in a future where it would be really cool for humanity to travel to space. But I was really craving for work that was more in my backyard, more impactful in the short term. So I was actively looking for ways to transition, or at least to add more food security on Earth, more projects related to food security on Earth to my portfolio of projects. That was why I thought Pakistan has lots of food security problems. I should be able to find jobs there and not just learn about it theoretically in a classroom in Boston, let's say, but really be on the ground and see what the reality is, and then look for ways in which my guild might be able to contribute to local issues.
And did these happen in the end or not?
It has not happened in the sense that for food security, what I realized is when I moved here, the sector that I thought I was interested in, indeed, learning about it theoretically is very different for learning about it practically. And once I was here, what I realized was that the skills that I could apply were not necessarily the skills that people needed, at least the skills that I thought was directly relevant. For example, food science. I thought food science is the closest thing to food security. So I have this one tool. Let me try to look for problems to apply this tool. And what I realized is in food security, the issue is often not lack of technology. We have people on Earth who are going hungry, not because we don't have the right scientific tools to grow enough food. It is really, sure, you can always grow things faster. You can do things, but what I realized, the fundamental reason we have people who are going hungry on Earth and we don't have people who are going hungry in space it's a policy failure. Is that there are people who decided that certain lives are not worth tending to. So it's an ethics of care. It is not a scientific problem foremost. And if I were to bring scientific tools to solving that problem, sure, I can make incremental impact, but it doesn't really matter.
So it was basically a set of setbacks probably when you came to realize that what you were doing before was not easily translatable into the new country, and then which is often the case for people like us, spouses moving for not our job but our husbands or our spouse. It depends. At times it's a tandem. Can be the woman or the husband or the job posting or the job opportunity to send us abroad. But often, yeah, and that's also the reason why I started this podcast. I was basically on a quest, and I was curious to hear about other people's experiences that had the same issues, the same challenges, not being able to do their own profession abroad, elsewhere. And as you mentioned before, maybe we can dig into a little bit what is the daily experience when, okay, you said that you decided to move, you didn't know about the full reality, because who knows? When we make a choice, we just need to learn how and see how it unfolds. But then, yes, when things after the sabbatical or the honeymoon phase into a new country, how they describe it in interculture training, when those phases fades or pass, sometimes we find ourselves frustrated and challenged, and we ask ourselves, now what do we do?
Yeah, exactly. About a year ago, so I've been here in Pakistan for almost 2 years. About a year ago, I said, all right, I really thought by the time I'd have spent a whole year in Pakistan, I would have some sort of short-term contract or full-time job in food security in Pakistan. That was my hypothesis coming in, and it has not borne out. So I said, okay, why is that? And I realized that I thought there would be a fit, and that fit doesn't exist. And I wondered, well, why is It could be for a few reasons. It could be that I haven't really worked hard to make the fit work. And I thought that's sort of true in the sense that around me there are all sorts of people who work in food security that I could reach out to. And I sometimes I do talk to them, but what I realize is every time I talk to them, I realize that the work to network, I realize that as I learn more about their work, about what food working in food security really means, it didn't really pique my interest. I didn't say, oh man, I didn't come home and tell my partner, I really want to do that. And that's why I didn't continue to network. I didn't say, hey, I would love to do what you're doing. If a position becomes available, here's my CV. Can you keep it in mind? I didn't push on that. So I also could have said, well, why didn't you push? Partly I was coming out of maternity leave. So sometimes I just didn't really have the bandwidth. I just didn't have the energy. And I said, but is that completely true? Sometimes I didn't have the energy, but I also know there are times when I don't have the energy, but my mind is so captivated by the idea of the work that I still keep pushing. And that just wasn't the case. So then I realized, oh, it's not that I'm not working hard enough to make I just haven't worked hard enough to make the jigsaw puzzle fit. It's that it's not a fit. And I'm not interested in making a fit. That's why I don't have a job in food security, because I literally haven't been interested enough to make it happen. So then I said, well, then what's the story going to be? Is it that after a number of years in Pakistan, somebody asked me, so what did you do in Pakistan? And I said, oh, I didn't do anything related to Pakistan because I couldn't find anything that made sense. And would I be okay with that story? And I thought I wouldn't be okay, because what I realized, it was really important to me to contribute to the local community that I live in some way. So then I thought, well, all right. So apparently the one tool that I thought would be really useful here is not the tool that the local community needs or the tool that I want to use. Is that the end of the story? And I realized, no, I have lots of other tools. And as it turns out, I had thought another reason we had chosen Pakistan, the other main reason, besides potential work fit for me, was the mountains, because I love to rock climb. And I had done some training as a rock climbing instructor and guide back in the US before I came here. But I thought I would just come here to climb recreationally. But then I realized, like, just by keeping, I think, my mind open and not being closed-minded, saying, no, I only do this for work, or I only do that for recreation. But it turned out, as I spoke to people, I realized that there is a small and dedicated group of rock climbers here. And there is hunger for people, women especially, who don't rock climb, who are interested in learning. And also that there are nonprofit groups. One comes to mind called Ascend, that are based in Pakistan, that are interested in teaching leadership and outdoor leadership skills, empowering girls and young women through climbing. And then I said, and over time, I didn't really take it seriously at first, but over time, I said, yeah, maybe that's the tool that I can bring to bear here. The surprising tool. So in the past year, I've put on a few retreats. I've put on one yoga and climbing retreat with Ascend, where I'm the volunteer instructor. I have a bit more experience than the recently minted instructors that are part of Ascend. So I'm mentoring them. We're sort of testing out this idea of, can Ascend as a social enterprise, can they take tourists, local tourists, as well as international tourists into the mountains in Pakistan, teach them rock climbing, Can we partner with local yoga teachers and do these retreats? We piloted one in Skardu in northern Pakistan. We also did a weekend of climbing instruction. We called it Climb School for people who are just interested in learning rock climbing in Islamabad. And now I'm in talks with Ascend to see maybe how I can become a more active part of their organization.
That's amazing.
So, yeah. And I couldn't have imagined that this would be my way, right?
I just listening to you, it came clear the so many values that you are honoring, but as well all your passions and the things that you really care about. And you're an extremely curious person, so you're not someone who's just staying, sitting on the couch waiting for the days to unfold and, and happy with not doing anything. Completely the opposite. But I'm surprised to see that with such a young child, you are so active already after maternity pause, the break. But anyway, I often call it these experiences when we move to a different country and we are not allowed, or we don't, yes, we're not allowed to do the same profession that we used before. I call it the gym, the brain gym or the skills gym for ourselves in a more like a metaphor, right? We are not just meant to be on this earth to express one job, one profession, and to do one thing in our life. And often these opportunities are kind of giving us the permission to experiment, try out our other passions and let them become new talents or new skills. And it often would have never happened if we stayed in the same life that we had before. We would have not dared to quit everything and just say, okay, you see yourself in Boston? No, tomorrow I quit my food scientist job and I go for my own business, bringing people, empowering women, rock climbing and leadership. I don't know, maybe yes, but most of the time, no. And so I try to, with all the people, the amazing, interesting people that come into the podcast, try to give and inspire. So give the listener new stories, food for thought, and inspiring to see the opportunities when we think that we don't have the chance to do what we were doing before. Sometimes I call it rejection is redirection because
Yeah.
sometimes we just find a wall, but it's not true that we have no other way to go. We just might shift or turn the gaze to someone else, somewhere else, and do an experiment and do something different. It was, and this reconnects me to what you were saying in your questionnaire about your experiences that you did with the extracurricular activities. You've always been a very brilliant person and curious, interested. I think this would have played anyway. And moving to Pakistan was just the opportunity for you to express yourself in other environments.
Well, I yes, I think so, but I think it was only I think I couldn't have taken this step to even come to Pakistan and followed through with it if I hadn't done the work beforehand. And I remember actually specifically about 6 months before we decided, not even 6 months, 3 months before we decided to come to Pakistan, I was working with my coach. And at that time, I had just finished my PhD, and I was working with her specifically to craft the next phase of my life. And I told her I had come up with some sort of like crazy like thread, like a sort of Frankenstein idea of how I'm going to do my next job, which was I said, so in a previous sabbatical, I'm a big fan of taking sabbaticals. In a previous sabbatical, I had gone and trained as a massage therapist. And then I had all this training and work experience as a food scientist. And then I had done enough rock climbing that I thought I wanted to do climbing instruction professionally. And so basically, I told my coach that, like, I was like, in my next career, I'm trying to figure out some way in which I can do all of these. I can be a food scientist part-time and somehow combine like climbing, guiding, and massage therapy or like movement and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't know how it's going to work, but I've decided I have to do this. And she's like, why? Like, that seems pretty hard. Like you can do it, but like why? Because I wasn't talking about it in this way of I was so excited. I was talking about it like somehow I've decided I must do this. And but I'm also like kind of troubled by the prospect of having to pull this off. And what we uncovered was I had decided that just because I had like invested a certain amount of time or effort in getting a certification or in getting to a certain degree or a certain amount of experience, my brain had decided, therefore, you must continue to do it, or it would be called a waste. So that's why I had continued to tell myself, because I had gotten trained in massage therapy, I must make money as a massage therapist. And that would be the only way to make it have been quote unquote worthwhile, for example. Or it would be a waste if I had, 10 plus years of experience as a food scientist and then to say all of a sudden I'm not going to do it. And then and then I realized that sort of idea is really not serving me. And also it doesn't have to be that way. All of those things have fed into me, have flowed through me like a river. It might flow through me again, or I've absorbed parts of it. But again, I think it was very much like holding on to certain identities or feeling it's not okay to shift in that identity. What does it mean to be a food scientist who currently just isn't happen to be working in food science? Like if I'm a mother, but I'm asleep, and not actively taking care of my child doesn't mean all of a sudden stop being a mother or a spouse or whatever, right? If I make a living as a cook on the weekends when I'm not cooking or in the afternoon when I'm not cooking, do I all of a sudden stop being a cook? And I realized that all that sort of idea it doesn't make sense. These rules I had set for myself of what I'm allowed to do, what I must keep doing, what I'm allowed to combine or not combine, and also what I'm allowed to make money off of and not make money off of, and what value or lack of value, it gives to a thing.
I see a
So
lot of, um, well, what you mentioned is really interesting. And often, especially women, I think they struggle with their identity or professional identity once they have to deal with a transition which is so different from what they were doing before. And what you just expressed about the value is very important because yes, most of the time we are the worst critic about ourselves, and we don't have compassion, or we don't allow certain phases, except the sabbatical, because probably you gave a pretty a nice connotation to the sabbatical, which has nothing that can be worse or judged. Sorry, that can be negative or judged about the sabbatical, but not being able to pursue your previous career, and that goes in a professional identity crisis at times when we move to a new country. And that's very important for everyone like us in that in this space, other spouses, that they don't give themselves permission to be just enjoying a slow pace. And especially you were saying a moment in your life. So one of those important life phases like maternity and moving abroad. So becoming a family is an important phase. And most of the time those big shifts happen after maternity. And I see you probably had, of course, your very active mind with all of the values behind pushing, trying to make sense about what was the next phase. And so, were you happy about working with these coaches? Did you get any important progression or learning?
Absolutely. I would say I've always been a very reflective person, and therapy, I first was exposed to therapy before coaching. And therapy helped me uncover a lot more, just uncover and reflect and have revelations. Oh, now I realize this is the way I react, why I reacted this way or that way. And then at a certain point, therapy, I felt like I hit a wall with therapy in the sense that it helped me uncover why I've gotten to where I am, how, make sense of my path from the present backwards. But then I was curious about how to move forward in healthier ways. If I wanted to change how I showed up in my life in the future, then my friend told me, oh, there's this thing called coaching where you can actively change your patterns, and you can have a thought partner who helps you troubleshoot that and help and pushes you. It's really not that different from like a physical trainer, like a coach who you hire at the gym, which at that time I was more used to the idea that, like, in popular culture, the idea of a physical trainer and a coach who can help you run faster, for example. I understood the idea of that. But a coach who helps you excel in life, like a life coach, I was very skeptical until one time. During that time I was working a lot on interpersonal conflicts and how I showed up. And I had this really stressful interaction with a landlord. And I was like, I'm done with feeling a certain way in with people in authority and feeling like I didn't show up the way I wanted to, and having lots of regrets afterwards. I don't want to live the rest of my life afterwards saying, oh, I should have done that, I should have done this. I wanted to show up feeling powerful and really affirmed in the moment and say the bold things I wanted to say in the moment. And then this coach that my friend had been mentioning to me, her name is Cara Lowenthal, the coach. My friend had been mentioning her on and off. And I was like, okay, let me just check out her podcast, because why not? Like, therapy wasn't really helping me get the breakthrough talking it out to people. People were just like, oh yeah, that's a tough situation to be with, to be in with a landlord. I don't know how I would have handled it. I was like, okay, that's also not helpful. Like, friends, sometimes it's like they're empathetic, but they're not that effective in helping us think through how to change. Then I listened to a few of her podcasts about people pleasing. They were super short. And I was like, it was almost like taking medicine, going to the medicine cabinet and being like, I need something because this guy is really triggering my people pleasing thing. Oh, let me just listen to her 10-minute thing on people pleasing. Wow. Like, that just all of a sudden shifted the way I'll deal with that in the future. I wouldn't sound, I'm not saying like listening to 10 minutes just changed like all of a sudden got me from like 0 to 100, but it got me to like 0 to 30% on a thing that hadn't shifted in a long time. So being able to make that progress, just listening to a coach who laid it out like that and who gave me steps on how to show up slightly differently next time, but better, that really made me realize the value of a coach. And over time, I've worked with lots of different coaches because then I realized anything where I want progress quickly, I need a coach for. So then I really doubled down, even like for rock climbing and mountaineering. At a certain point, I was like, yeah, I've hit a dead end with what I don't know of coaching myself. I want a coach for that. If I want to hit my goal, I'm spending lots of money, or if I have to spend 20 hours, maybe not 20, like 15 hours in the gym every single week and lead up to this big trip to the Peruvian Andes, I want to make it count. I want to make sure I'm making the most of that training. So let me talk to a coach who can really hold me accountable. Same thing. If I want to like pull off this transition to Pakistan without completely losing my mind, where I am having a child, I am changing jobs, where I'm changing cities and countries basically all at once, where I want to like even have a sense I'm like thriving and not just like barely holding on to this transition. I need somebody to help me. I need help here.
That's a perfect portrait that you gave, an explanation on how our profession can be helpful in a quick and effective way without going deep into um, heavy stuff like you would do with a therapist. And those are two completely different domains. And what I try to explain often is that what works for one person might not work for someone else, but most of the time we have this freedom to choose our own tools. And so just experiment, just go out and try out one person, one coach, a mentor. Sometimes you just need a mentor that gives you clarity and guidance through certain aspects, but at least make use of all the opportunities and tools that are available and progress into what you are aspiring to for your journey. And I would recommend this to anyone. I think it's really important to be also empathetic to ourselves and be patient and give ourselves the time to, as you said, to transition. So processing the transition needs a time on its own. And often we are pressured by the expectation, which are always external. Um, and if we look inward to ourselves, we know that we need more time to be healing or to find our place or to be able to walk with our own feet in that new path. But we can just internalize other people's thoughts, and that becomes a noise in our mind. And it can also become a problem, affecting our emotions and our physical well-being. So I'm glad that you got a positive outcome of engaging with coaches, and that gave you that sprint or energy to think through what were your project. And I bet it gave you also an idea as a profession, because you now are a coach yourself, right? So you engage into a coaching training.
Yeah. And again, I think it comes back to 3 years ago, if you had said that I would be working as a career coach, I also wouldn't have believed you. because coming out of my PhD, so during my PhD was when I started when I started hiring coaches. I really wanted to thrive in graduate school, not just survive, because I don't know I know maybe of one person who had quote unquote a generally good time during their grad school experience. It's just like a confluence of factors, lack of systemic support. The thing that you're doing research is fundamentally hard. It's like humans just don't like unknown things, uncertainty, and research is all about searching for what you don't know. So the task is hard, and then there's not much systemic support to support you as you do the hard thing, which makes it doubly hard. And that's when I said, let me work with some coaches. And as I received coaching and really started to have a good time during my PhD, I then joined and then headed up this peer advising group in my university for other students, for other PhD students in my department, which was in the engineering department. And so we would host coffee hours where anybody can drop by, and then we would chat with people one on one or just in a little group. So it wasn't a professional, like one on one confidential coaching container, although sometimes we would offer that as well. But just that, but it was a container to be like, you have questions, you have doubts, if you are looking for advice or just empathy about the struggles of doing a graduate school, you can come here. I would come out of those coffee hours just thinking, wow, this one conversation with that person, I think had more impact today or for a month or for a year than my research might ever have. And at the end of my PhD, I said, maybe I just want to become a therapist because the impact is so palpable. And I can tell I'm not half bad at it. And I was like, nah, like, what does that mean? Like, who am I to just, I'm just going to pivot and go become a therapist? But I think I took that idea and just understood, okay, at least why is that idea even in my head? I think it's because there's core of this helping people, advising them, which is I've always done. And so I think I sort of took that. And then when I moved to Pakistan and during that sabbatical, I was like, well, what am I going to do next? Then I started taking this idea of not therapy, but coaching seriously. And it really was like, I was talking to a friend. I said, I really like this. And, I think it could work for moving to Pakistan. It would be globally, I would be flexible as a mother. I don't want to work a full-time 40-hour job. I need to, once we leave Pakistan, I want to be able to take that container with me elsewhere. Like maybe being a coach could really be helpful, like work. And then she was like, well, have you tried it? Like formally? I was like, no. And I had all of these questions of like, well, maybe it wouldn't work for this reason, maybe it wouldn't work. She's like, just like find somebody that you can coach for a little bit of money. So both of you take it seriously. Just coach them for an hour officially. Not like hanging out with a friend during coffee chat, but this is a serious coaching container. And just try it and see whether you enjoyed it, because maybe you don't. And that would be the end of that. I was like, okay, I'll try it. And then I tried it. This particular friend who was doing a career transition at the time, she agreed to be my guinea pig, and when we tried it, and then like in the first session, I was like, yeah, I really like this. I really like it. And she also was like, oh, you're good. So I was like, okay, that's all I needed. I just needed enough data to be like, shall we do a second session? We signed up for 4 at first. And then after 4, she was like, let's do another 4. So that was enough for me to be like, great. Like this is all the data that I need for now.
And you discover a new talent of yourself.
Yeah.
Even if you knew
And
that you were good already at supporting others that you mentioned throughout your career before, But having these new tools that you could acquire and help others in doing something new, like transitioning career, was something new with spark of the novelty. And while you were describing before, I really saw when you said that there was a lack of systemic support in doing the research, and research in things that had no answers. I really thought the commonality of your experience as a spouse in a country so different from where you were used to live before, and basically you have no much support as a spouse with a new born baby, and you're researching things that you don't know. So in daily life, you have no anchor points, you have no reference, you have no family support around. So even the friends that are not so close or at the beginning, they need to become your extended family, and you have to trust them so much that you can rely on them, because that's what we do when we are far away from family or from known support. So it was interesting to see and how you already are, you already have within yourself all the tools and the skills.
I really like that point. I guess that is the larger framework, maybe the larger level tool, because whether it's in the PhD or it's like, oh, I need to do this particular experiment, I need this tool. Where do I find the tool? I don't know. Okay, so just start emailing that department, pop over to this other building, just look around, right? One, oh, that person directed me to this other person. Eventually you figure it out. Or whether it's my career coming out of majoring in physics at university, my parents were like, why would you take a physics degree and then go work in food? And what would you do in food? I didn't want to be a cook working in a restaurant, which is like sort of a better known sort of path. I said, oh, there's this new thing called like, science and cooking, which was, and but where's my role? Well, I don't know, because nobody has, the roles are not defined in this very niche new field. Or whether it's moving here, I just wrote a little summary of tips and tricks for strategies for giving birth and postpartum care for Islamabad here for our local newsletter for international folks. Um, and when I was writing, I realized, wow, I forgot, but I did a lot of research. Again, it was like I didn't know anybody who had given birth. And then it was just like, who do you know texting this random person? Wait, oh, I think I know that person who might have given birth in this. Okay, can you connect me to them? Eventually I cobbled together. Eventually I gave birth and sort of like created the birth more or less, the like got the tools in place that I needed. And I think that's also what I'm trying to do for my clients, which is like one client recently finished working with me, and they said when they first signed up to work with me, they thought that maybe coming out of our time together, they would know exactly, they will have this very prescriptive plan. Like 3 months from now, I will quit this job and then I will know to apply to these two other jobs and then boom, boom, boom. But instead, they don't have that. What they do have is they know their core values. They know really well what they want and what they don't want in terms of like design specs for their life, not just their professional life, but their personal life. So in fact, that having coming up with that like core compass almost means they don't have to have the prescriptive thing.
And when they are ready, they will be able to do it.
Exactly.
There's
Yeah.
nothing that can force them. And that's one of the things that we struggle most with clients in coaching. I bet it's the same for you, that they just don't know how to do things, and they want someone else to tell them what to do. And they just want to get rid of the responsibility of making the choices, or how to select, how to do the research and how to select the right path or the right tools, the right moment. Um, but that's so individual, and everyone has their own journey. And what we do is just facilitating that transition, which is again a transition or a discovery, because they deep down they know what is important to them, and just working on the values is highlighting and bringing back. Sometimes we talk about mirroring as a tool, or in coaching as well. Because in it was fascinating. I was reading this book about quantum energetics, and they, funny enough, they were saying how the brain is disengaged, and we mostly I think 95% we live on autopilot, right?
Mm.
And when we are in autopilot, we're not present to ourselves. And so again, we forget all our abilities and what matters to us, what is very important, because we have come to a sort of conditioning, or we are just going following the rails, and we think that we're not capable of taking another road or turning right at the next red light, because we just want to explore something different. So it's kind of going back to own again the rain, or harnessing our own potential.
Yeah.
And we can't force, or we can't expect someone else to tell us what we do, because it wouldn't be aligned, and we will not be ready. So I love that you brought your, so basically your modality or your operating system was just that. And you were researching and applying all your skills to do whatever you do. It just comes natural.
Yeah, I guess so. I wouldn't say it came naturally. I think it was, hmm. Yeah, I think I think at university, I think all the way up until university, I was very much uh, walking sort of the model minority store path in the United States. Um, I was a good student. I think I was naturally, I think, fairly obedient. Maybe naturally, but also, and the way I was conditioned growing up in Chinese culture, various things happened. I think I was just like I was put on that path to excel, and I did excel, and I just kept going. So I went to Harvard for undergrad, and I think it was actually at Harvard where so I think once I went off to Harvard, my parents were like, great. We've set her off on like the path to like glory and success, and she's gonna become a physicist, which is like respectable or whatever, and that'll be fine. But I think it was there where I was like, I was no longer at homes. And that was when my rebellious phase began, where I was like, wait, there's all of these other things that you could do. Then I took a year off. My parents were like, what? Like, now you're going to take a year off during university. I went to China, and my parents were like, we left China for a reason. Why are you going back? And and then I turned that year. It's supposed to be a year abroad, but I turned it into a year off. That really freaked out my parents. And then, I have to give credit to my parents because they really didn't understand why I was delaying my education for a year. They thought it was a huge waste of time, and they would just not let me get away with it. So every time, I mean, I made the decision and I did turn it into a year off, but every time I saw them, they just hammered me. And so I actually had a very uncomfortable relationship with my parents in my early 20s because they thought I had lost my mind, and they thought I was making really wrong choices. And I really wanted their approval. So I kept trying to convince them. Like I wasn't willing to fall back in line and just do the obedient child thing, but I also really wanted to explain to them so they would validate me. And actually, the validation took a long time to come. They never really understood me until maybe now. maybe they don't even understand. Maybe they just now trust me. But back then, I was really pushed by my parents to have to elucidate, like, why am I doing this? And I think it was then that I said, well, why? I had to come up with all of these reasons. They were like, really, you're going to work in food? Are you just like going to wash dishes? And I was like, and I really had to rationally explain, no. They were like, what do you mean food and science? Like, what is that? Because what I was doing wasn't even traditional food science. It was science in cooking. So it was like working with restaurants and haute cuisine and I didn't do it well. I didn't explain it well. I couldn't explain it well to myself completely. But I think I really had to account for myself then. And then when I had to account myself, I was resentful that I had to explain to myself to my parents, but it also made me see. Sometimes they'd be like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. And I realized, yeah, this thing I'm trying to do doesn't make sense in this way. And sometimes I would course correct because of them calling me out essentially. So I think since then, and also like, I had socially, it was not acceptable to take time off. At Harvard, everybody was going on to like doing like investment banking or consulting if they didn't know. And there I was like saying, oh, I'm going to go work in a restaurant or I'm going to go work on like quantifying the science of umami. Sure, maybe it sounds cool, but it also sounds like I'm going to become like a hobo maybe. so I think that I had to really like develop some courage or maybe just learn to stand in my beliefs then.
And you said it beautifully on how those challenges come to us to become strong and learn how to go through those challenges. Um, Definitely conditioning from culture or family or environment is a returning pattern in my podcast, and many of the guests have been experiencing those same situations. And I must say, you really had two tough culture that you had to endure too, because of course both values in China and in the US professionally are really, there's a lot of high expectation, high achiever, both culture high achiever. So I can understand how it was difficult for you. But that's the growth, right? That that came for you, and how you understood also the validation, how it couldn't come from external, but it had to come from within, and we are the only one responsible for being happy with what we do and giving ourselves, if we can, I mean, economically or the situation allows, to try out, experiment, and find. I mean, even in a job not so high and qualified, we could be a secretary, or maybe we can just go and make coffees in a cafe, or just choose to fill in the shelves in the supermarket. But still, every different profession, there are pros and cons that need to align with what we like and what we can physically endure. And then in the end, are we happy? Are we doing any impact on others people? Maybe serving coffee or making bread is much better than filling the shelves at the supermarket. But every profession has a dignity, and every choice we make, it has a return for us.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something, I guess, why I do what I do, because I'm always asking myself, what is the meaning here for me? I think I maybe because I got to experience a lot of Chinese and American culture, which the mainstream I think there were times where it clicked. So I think I absorbed the mainstream ideology, like the mainstream ideas of like your work is your value, et cetera, et cetera. I absorbed it until one day I questioned it. And then it was sort of like the drop. The drop was like, whoa, that ideology or that way of thinking about life makes absolutely no sense.
And we can choose.
And then realizing, oh, I can choose not to believe that. I can say some people believe it. If they choose to believe that, good for them because that's their choice. And I can also choose to believe something else. And I can live my life according to, I just have to get really clear on my beliefs. It doesn't, because we can believe anything about anything